start with part 2. And Mr. Thomas Winder now is in the Drew village. I'll just say the Drew village. Now, these are not Druids. This is something different. They're on Mount Hermon.
Yes.
And it's a very unique religious sect up there that do not really, when I went to Israel my first time, we had a guide, and he said, "You want to go visit the Druze?" And I had a Jewish couple also with us at the same time, and they said no. So just leave them alone. So something was up with that, right?
Well,
but anyway, for some reason, we introduced your exploits at the Great Pyramid to let people in on a little bit of your character and nature. And you stuck around even though they didn't want you there at first, and then things turned around for you. And now Thomas is they let him do his archaeology in their village, and at least we're starting off with the ruins of a church. So that leads us into the second part. So Mr. Thomas Winder, once again, I invite you to the program, and it's exciting to have you in your little adventures, and that you are up in the Druze village on Mount Hermon. And at this time, I'd like for you to continue your adventure, if you would, please.
Well, thank you for having me, George, and nice to see you again. And, to talk about the Golan Heights of Israel, you can't leave out the people that live there, that have been living on that mountain for over 1,000 years, when in 1100, that's AD, so approximately 1,000 years ago, they split from Islam when they were living in Egypt. Yafari, their prophet, just basically decided they weren't going to follow Muhammad because he was running around killing people, and these people are generally peaceful. And they called a spade a spade. They said, we're not going to be involved whatsoever in this Islamic genocide of the rest of the planet. We just want to go live somewhere and be left alone. They are fiercely independent people. So they left Egypt, and they picked Mount Hermon to go live on, to be left alone.
Right.
Most people in the Middle East don't like to live near the snow. It's too cold. So not too many people are living up on the mountain, because in the wintertime it freezes. Anyway, the Druze moved up there, and they were left alone by everybody. And then in 1967, there was the big war in the Middle East. Everybody attacked Israel, and Israel basically, knocked the socks off all their enemies. And they gained the West Bank from Jordan. They gained the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and they also gained the Golan Heights from Syria.
Right.
Well, later on in life, the Sinai Peninsula was given back to Egypt, and the West Bank was never asked for by the Jordanians. They didn't want it back. They just wanted peace. So the people that live in the Golan Heights are Syrians. They are from Syria for the last 1,000 years. So when Israel took it over in 1967, there's two groups of Druze. There's the Druze that lived on the Lebanon side of Mount Hermon, and the Druze that lived on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Same people, but the people that live below Lebanon actually helped Israel in the wars. They sided with Israel. But the Syrian Druze did not. They said, hey, we don't want to fight anybody. We don't want to get our hands dirty in any of this, but we are Syrians, so at least we're going to be we're gonna give the Syrians our allegiance. Well, that didn't work out so well, did it? In 67, the whole thing gets taken over. The Golan Heights, the land of Bashan, gets taken over by Israel. And what they did with the Syrians, Druze that lived there, was basically say, okay, look, you've been living here all this time. Well, of course, we're going to let you stay in your homes, and we'll give you something like a reservation. You can have your own autonomy. You can have your own political subdivision that we will just take care of things from a distance, and you can have your lands, you can have your homes, and you can have autonomy. That's worked out great for everyone, but obviously the Jews, like your friends, they don't trust those people up there on Mount Hermon because they don't know them and they don't take the time to get to know them. It's changing now, of course, because my gosh, 1967 was a long time ago. And so now they've had children since, and the new generation, of course, are born in Israel. So now they're Israel Druzim. They have nothing to do with Syria, except that their parents and their grandparents are Syrians. It's a mixed. Culturally, it changes with each generation up there. I just happened to come along at the right time, and now I get to live there, which is really a miracle. People in Israel don't even understand me. The people at the the population and immigration authority, they don't know what to do with me. No one has ever asked to live in Israel, to live in Majd al-Shams with the Druze. I'm the first.
Okay.
So they don't know what to do. I have a registered business over there. I am the Holy Land Research Institute. I am a 501(c) here in the United States, as well as registered a nonprofit corporation in Israel. But the Israelis look at me and go, we don't know what to do with you. So I'm kind of in limbo in some ways, but in other ways, I get to travel. In fact, on Saturday, I'm going back. I'm going back for another 6 months. I stay 6 months every year.
Right. We wanted to get you before you took off and maybe catch you along the way and while you're there so we can keep up. You have an interesting hypothesis because I'm jumping maybe a little bit ahead, but there's in the biblical text, the translation, the transfiguration of Jesus. And by tradition, and it's known really as a tradition, that it possibly happened on Mount Tabor. And Mount Tabor kind of like rises above the landscape like a giant dome from a distance in the plain of Jezreel. And Christian tradition, I have to emphasize tradition, places Jesus in that location. And Tabor is about 11 miles southwest of the Sea of Galilee and about 5 miles east of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. And Mount Tabor itself rises on 1,500 feet, and it's quite a drive, even if you take a taxi to get to the top of Mount Tabor. So it rises 1,500 feet above the Jezreel plain in Lower Galilee. So it became a very strategic location in the ancient past because there's a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, there's a trade route that goes by there. And it's important to control the trade route. So Mount Tabor became, you could say, important. Matter of fact, in Psalms 89 and 12, it says, north and south, you have created them. Well, what? He's talking, prophet talking to God, I guess. Have created them. What is them? Tabor and Hermon. Joyously, we praise your name. Okay. So anyway, there's a hymn about the importance of both mountains, Tabor and Hermon. At this point, I'm just going to say Mount Tabor has been for many years, right? Many years, the traditional location of the Transfiguration. But however, here you go, Thomas Winder. And it kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
then I
get in the mix.
You get in the mix. Now, when you think about what came before the Transfiguration, Jesus and his disciples went to Caesarea Philippi, or today it's called Banyas. And Banyas, or Caesarea Philippi, is 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. At the base of Mount Hermon, the base of the mountain where you're staying with the Druze. So that puts you in the proximity, if we can say. Now, at that Caesarea Philippi, it became a very important cultic location because water flowed from the mountain, Mount Hermon, out of the caves of Caesarea Philippi. And water represents fertility. In the ancient world, worshipped fertility cults. So the Hellenistics and the Romans, which we still have ruins of, and many, many tourists go there a year, go to Caesarea Philippi to examine and to investigate the ruins of where Jesus took his disciples, and he said something very important to Peter. Go ahead, Thomas.
Well, he says to Peter, after asking the great question, which we all have to answer, Jesus says, "Who do people say that I am?"
Yes.
And of course, the disciples respond, well, some people say Jeremiah, some people say Isaiah, some people say Elijah, at least one of the prophets. And then Jesus looks to Peter and he says, "But who do you say that I am?" And of course, Peter responds correctly. He says that you are the Son of the living God. You are the Messiah. And Jesus then responds. And this is where everything comes from at this point. Because when you read the story in Matthew 16 and the first portion of 17, you find out that Peter wants to make 3 Sukkots when he walks up the trail to a high, lonely mountain, which is in the scripture. Then he wants to build 3 Sukkots, 3 tabernacles, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Well, there's only one time of year that Jewish people build Sukkots. It's exclusive. It only happens one time a year for 7 days, and that's the Feast of Sukkot, or what we call tabernacles.
Right.
So you have, to start with, you have Jesus and his disciples, instead of being in Jerusalem, they're in Caesarea Philippi, literally at the goat demon Pan's altar at the gate to hell. Because this is what Jesus says. He says, this is Peter. He says, this is Petros, which is the pebble. I believe he's bringing Peter's ego down to size, because Peter, after answering the question, "Who do you say that I am?" he gets the answer right. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Then Jesus gives him a promotion. Immediately he says, "Well, flesh and blood didn't tell you that. Only my Father could have told you that. And now you are Simon Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah, son of a prophet." So Peter's ego is swollen up. And of course, Jesus has to say, wait a minute, this is Petro, the pebble. And upon this rock, I will build my church. And the gate to hell will not prevail against it. So the Catholics instantly say that, well, Peter's the first pope, so he's the rock that the church is built on top of. He's it. The Protestants, the protesters, okay, come along and they say, no, that's impossible, because in the very next line, Jesus refers to Peter as Satan. He says, get behind me, Satan. Your mind is not on God's will, but on your own will. So we have a split between Catholics and Protestants right here. The Catholics say, because they don't pay attention to anything Jewish, they say that when Jesus says, let's go, Peter, James, and John, let's go for a little walk, because some of you guys are going to see the glory of God before you die. He says, okay, let's go, Peter, James, and John. Let's go for a little walk. Now we know where they're at to start with. The scripture is clear. They're at Caesarea Philippi, at the very gate to hell. They're standing right in front of it. Everybody knows this, right in front of Pan, the goat demon's altar. Now you gotta wonder, what on earth is Jesus going to Mount Hermon for in the first place, instead of going to Jerusalem like everybody else is going? Well, he went to Mount Hermon because it turns out that Mount Hermon is the mountain where the bad angels landed back in Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. They came to planet Earth they left their heavenly abode to come to Earth, according to the book of Enoch as well, to corrupt the DNA of the human species. What they did was they mated with the human women on Mount Hermon and created what we call the Nephilim, or the biblical giants, which literally corrupted the entire world, and the flood was brought to get rid of the giants. Read it and weep in Genesis chapter 6. If you haven't read that already, good place to start. And then you have to go to the book of Enoch to fill in all the blanks. So Jesus is on Mount Hermon for a specific reason. He's going to declare his church on the rock, which is Mount Hermon, on the very rock that represents sinners of planet Earth that are literally worshiping the goat demon with open orgy, public orgy, human sacrifice, and all the lasciviousness and debauchery that you can possibly imagine that went on in the pagan world, which was demonstrated pre-flood by all those pagan gods, which, by the way, were borrowed even after the flood. And we have all those pagan gods that end up with different names, but the Greeks love them and worship them. And then the Romans come along, knock down the Greek stuff, put up their own temples, and rename the gods, but they're the same gods. You can go from Ishtar to Astarte to Aphrodite to Venus. It's the same goddess that started out as Baal's wife, or Baal's cohort, if you will, way back in the very beginning, when those bad angels came to earth and created the giants that became the pagan gods. Now, all that happens.
Thomas, just want to make a quick observation. So what?
Yeah.
Now, people would have to watch part one, but you excavated for a number of seasons at Tal El Hammam, one of the suggested place of Sodom and Gomorrah, and you left that to go to Mount Hermon, where the what's called the angels landed.
Well, they're called the Watchers. They're called the Watchers, the B'nai Elohim.
You just went from the fire to the fire pot, man.
Man, that's exactly what I did. In fact, if you read Genesis 14, you'll see that
you'd be safer in the pyramid.
That's the chapter where we find out that Lot from the gate of Sodom gets kidnapped by Keliomer of Damascus, and Abram, or what we call Abraham, goes after him. And you'll see where he went. And he goes on the Damascus Road. And where does that Damascus Road go? It goes right past Tel Hatzor,
Right.
above the Sea of Galilee, and from Tiberias or Capernaum, same thing. They come together at Hatzor, and then it goes north along the river. It does not cross the river and go across the land of Bashan, because after all, the giants are over there. You got to go straight to Tel Dan, and then from what's right next door to Tel Dan? Caesarea Philippi on the Damascus Road. When I arrived in Majd al-Shams on Mount Hermon about 5 years ago, I had already done a paper in 1993 when I was going to school in Jerusalem. I did a paper on where the Transfiguration took place. And I knew what mountaintop it was on, because the trail from the goat demon's altar at Panias, the trail is still there to this day. And where does that trail go that Jesus, Peter, James, and John took? Up the hill on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. In fact, Matthew even says after the sixth day, they went up to the high lonely mountain. The mountains are the same today. The trail, George, you and I can go hike that trail tomorrow if we were on a plane tonight. It's that simple. Take the trail. Where do you think it goes? It goes right straight up to a high lonely mountain. By the way, that mountain today is where Nimrod's fortress was built.
Oh, wow, that's right.
But Nimrod's fortress was only built 1,000 years ago by the Islamics when they were trying to keep the Christians out after they had retaken the Holy Land, or the Levant, for themselves. They kicked out the Byzantines.
It's Crusader period?
Yeah.
I have to look it up again.
Yeah, the Islamics kick those guys out, take over.
It's a nice place to visit.
And what do they do? They build a castle right on top of Nimrod's Fortress Hill. Actually, who knows? Actually, it was probably called something else before then. But
it's called Nimrod's Castle now.
Watch this. They name it after Nimrod. Why did they do that? I'll tell you why. Because you know what's on top of that hill? Baal's throne. Baal, the first big dog, if you will, of the pagan pantheon. He's numero uno of the pagan gods. Baal, or we call him Baal, to be correct. Okay.
Well, it is a good site of fertility.
Well, that's right. And so what you have is Jesus not only going to Caesarea Philippi to reverse the curse of those pagan gods and declare his church out of sinners, out of literally the sinners of the world, which that rock represents. So we are the rock, the church, and he gives us total power of authority over those pagan gods and the forces of darkness when he says, I will give you, the church, the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So he does that at Pan's altar, the goat demon, and then he takes his 3 captains up to the top of the hill for the last day of the Feast of Tabernacle.
So we were at Panias, and then we took a trail. We're up on Mount Hermon.
That's right.
Now you went up to Mount Hermon, but you're close to or around Nimrod's castle. From a distance, you think you're in Transylvania, because that's what it looks like. And there you say there's an altar of Baal, and Jesus is taking his disciples, according to your hypothesis, your theory, and he's taking his disciples there, where this is ultimately going to be the place somewhere in there, I guess, the place of the Transfiguration.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to come back, and we're going to find out where you're at, take a look at your excavation, or what you're doing in the Jewish community up there. I think this is exciting. It's fun. I know for years and years, for centuries, since the Byzantine period, the tradition was Mount Tabor, even though it's way out of it's just too
It's
far.
75 miles south.
To just
from the
take
real
off with to just take off with his disciples, it's too far away.
Way too far away.
So Mount Hermon makes, just in the sense, being around Mount Hermon with his disciples, that location, or that mountain, to me seems like more pliable, more plausible, if I should, than Mount Tabor.
And George, it also fits the theology behind the story of why Jesus goes to Mount Hermon in the first place.
Right. So what we're going to do is when we come back the next time, we're going to proceed a little bit further. So we can call this the teaser, so that people come back, because eventually we're going to do a Zoom, and you're going to be over in Israel. You might be at the Jews village, or whatever we can do, and we'll be that much closer to these locations that you're talking about. And I think that'd be exciting. We'll be on location. What do you think, Thomas?
Hey, I'll be on location in 3 days, baby. I'll be there.
All right, so we're going to close out. My name is Dr. George Sparks. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. And remember to like and subscribe. Have a great day. All right, Thomas.